Leadership is taking people on a journey where there's a vision, guidance and purpose.
Good leaders lead with the heart as well as the head.
Leadership means doing the right thing for the right reason, no matter how difficult it might be.
You're listening to Leadership Unwrapped, a podcast where you will hear from people who are living leadership every day.
So we just had the most fabulous conversation with Aoife O'Brien, founder of Happier at Work. Like I'm coming away from it with a bit of a spring in my step. Like it was just fabulous.
Yeah, me too. I literally feel so uplifted by the conversation, by just her knowledge is just superb altogether. It's just absolutely incredible. Just a conversation that touched us so many different areas that are relevant to our listenership. Yeah, really, really liked it.
And just to talk to someone, I suppose, that's thinking about lots of the same things, I suppose, that we've been thinking and talking about with a different perspective, but just that kind of underlying shared desire, I suppose, in terms of making workplaces just that bit happier, that bit safer to be in, but just also hear about, I suppose, ways that we can lead in this space, ways that we can individually be in this space in order to contribute to it. Like there was so much in the conversation that I think you'll enjoy.
Yeah, her knowledge just shone through. I think I mentioned,
like I was speaking a bit tangentially about the culture of schools, and she just diagnosed the culture of schools in 2 seconds flat. It was really impressive with how she did it. But also, I've been listening to her podcast, and I've been looking at her website, and she's really interesting on this imposter syndrome. So I was doing some of the exercises, and I was like, I'm a bit, that's pretty resonating. So for me, she's definitely one to hear more about for our listenership.
Absolutely, and definitely worthwhile having a look at her own, exactly as you say, the website and her podcast as well. We'll definitely be linking them in. So
for sure.
Today, we're delighted to welcome Aoife O'Brien to the podcast. So Aoife O'Brien is the founder of Happier at Work, where she works with professionals to help them leave or improve toxic workplaces and supports companies in creating and maintaining workplaces employees don't want to leave. She supports organizations to become more people-focused, and this work is based on the premise that when you put people first, it leads to a happier working environment for all. As part of her work, Aoife created the Imposter to Empowered programme, which reached the finals of the 2022 Digital Women Awards, and has her own hugely successful podcast called Happier at Work, which we'll also include the link of in the description of our episode. Aoife also has an MSc in Organisational Behaviour, a DIP in Executive Coaching and a Cert in Career Coaching, and has lived and worked in Dublin, London, Perth and Sydney, contributing to the significant international reach of her work. So Aoife, we are absolutely delighted to have you with us today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Niamh. It's great to be here.
And a fellow podcaster. It's brilliant. We love it. Absolutely. Aoife, this is one of those things where looking at your work, it's kind of like, where do we even start with our conversation in one way? Do you know, because I think there's so much overlap, I suppose, in terms of the values that underpin, what all of us do. But I'd love to hear a little bit about, like, what drove you to set up Happier at Work in the first place?
It could be a long story or it could be a short story, but I suppose the short version of it is there were 2 occasions where I experienced unpleasantness at work, let's say, in 2 different working environments. So for most of my career, I was really happy and I probably took it for granted. I was in environments that were really positive cultures. It was such a nice place to be. Quite a bit into my career. And then I landed in a situation where I was like, something's going on here and it's not quite right. And it's only when I looked back afterwards that I realized it was actually quite toxic and misogynistic. They made a lot of promises. They didn't deliver on those promises. They probably thought I was going to stay, this golden handcuffs thing where, oh no, she's definitely going to stay here. Like there's no reason for her to leave. And I ended up leaving that. And then I joined another work environment, which wasn't toxic as such, but it was just an environment where I didn't feel like I could thrive. So in any work you know, in any area that I had worked before, I always felt like I was really thriving. I was being challenged. I was doing work that I really, really enjoyed. And it just, for it to happen twice in a row, I was like, something's going on here. I want to understand more about it. So I left my corporate role. I didn't really know where I was going to go. And I ended up doing, as you mentioned, I did some qualifications in coaching because I thought that's what I wanted to do. And I went on and I did a master's then in organizational behavior. And the master's brought together so many different things that I'm interested in. So it's the people side of business. It's the research, which was like my 20-year career, essentially, is research, taking data and turning it into something that's meaningful and answers questions. Like if I think about the kinds of questions I was answering previously, it was all to do with marketing and sales for big global brands. But that's not, you know, it's not something that really lit me up anymore. So it's like, how do I take everything that I've done in my career and apply that to something I really care about? And, you know, stemming from this idea that I was in these environments and I know that something better exists out there. So how do I help organizations to create these environments where people can really thrive? And then as individuals, how can you make better decisions when it comes to your career as well?
How do you find doing work now? Any regrets, or what's your take on it now?
That's such a good question, Patricia. So as an entrepreneur there, and I'm sure that people who are listening to this can relate to this as well, there are some times where I'm like, I wish I could just go and get a 9-to-5 job again. It's hard. Like it is hard work. There's something in particular that I really miss, and that's the people. You know, I do a lot of the stuff that I do on my own, or I'm dealing with clients on my own, which is great when you can build up those relationships. But there's no one to kind of turn to and have a moan or share really exciting news. It's really down to the individual to build up that network of people that you can share with, but it's not quite the same because they don't work in your business. So there are really good sides, and there's also in the back of my head on occasion, oh, how about if I just go and get a 9-to-5 job again? Yeah, so pros and cons, it does cross my mind from time to time, and the biggest thing that I miss are the people.
I would imagine so.
But your work is really influencing people. I've been following you for quite a while, and I'm just thrilled that you're here with us today. Just delighted that we've got to connect, because I've been listening to the podcast and following your work around imposter syndrome as well. So you are helping and influencing people in work, which I think is phenomenal, and it's quite positive, which I just want to compliment you on.
Thank you. And I really appreciate that, because it does make a difference. You don't often necessarily get that. So if you imagine again in a 9-to-5 role, in an employee-employer relationship where you're not self-employed, you tend to get that feedback, hopefully, from your manager. You might get it from your clients, you might get it from your peers. But when you're an entrepreneur, you're very much relying on other people to tell you what's going on. You don't necessarily get it on a regular basis. Sometimes you might ask people for it, and you know, they might verbally say, yeah, brilliant, but then it's like, okay, but I'd love something written as well that I can refer back to, that I can show other people, that I can put on my LinkedIn profile, things like that. So I really, really appreciate that. Thank you.
I actually really like listening to the guests that you have on your podcast. So I'm going to highly recommend listeners tune into it, and we'll put the notes or the link to it in the show notes. But you know, they're quite empowering in how they speak. You seem to choose people who are empowering, supportive, you know, positively disposed to making a better world. You seem to have a theme in the types of guests that you have.
Thank you. And I hadn't picked up on that before. And I'm wondering, is it kind of an energetic thing, not to get too woo-woo, but like that the people who are attracted to be on my podcast, and maybe just from the simple name of it, Happier at Work, like it's you're not going to have people who are really moaning about like all the miserable things that are going on. Is like, for me, what I really like is the practicality of, it's not just we're coming on and we're talking about this stuff in theory. It's, here are some practical things that you can do today to implement to create a better, happier working environment, or to create better, as we talked about before we started recording, how you feel about work and how do you feel better about the work that you do. What's getting in the way of how you feel about work? And then as leaders, how can we create that environment where people can really thrive?
This is it. And it makes it a lot more tangible, I suppose, doesn't it? Because I do feel like, and you know, if I'd be interested in hearing what you think about this, obviously it being so connected to what you do, but I think sometimes when we talk about being happy at work or enjoying what you do, it's discussed as very much like a luxury. Whereas it's, you know, it's about just creating conditions for more happiness at work. And what also really resonates with me is like, you talk about it in that individualistic way in some senses of like what can we do ourselves, but also that much more systemic piece and like what can we be doing more broadly in the workplace, and what can leaders be doing as well, which will obviously be of interest to our listeners. What can leaders be doing to facilitate that too? So it's like multi-level. But yeah, do you come across that piece about, you know, people think it's almost like a luxury or something that, you know?
Yeah, I think there's this perception that work is work and work should be hard, and why would you be happy at work, and you can't be happier at work. And like I say, maybe I was so lucky to be in those environments where it's like, I actually really enjoy this. I really like the people that I'm working with. I really like what I get to do, the people I get to meet. I like the progression that I'm able to make and the challenge that I'm facing. And it's only that I entered those environments where that wasn't the case that I was like, oh, wait a minute, not everywhere is like the places that I was really lucky to have been in before. So I think there are a lot of cases. And I suppose there's a few things that we could say about that like sometimes people are in a terrible situation, but they're staying because they think they're lucky in some way. So I can think of an example where a friend of mine, and she's working with a boss who doesn't really pay that much attention to her, and actually that kind of suits her at the moment, and so she's going to stay in that situation. She's like, I'm able to work from home, I'm able to work really flexibly, my boss doesn't bother me at all. Now if I'm on the outside looking in, which I am, I'm thinking I would want a boss who's actually paying attention to me and who's challenging me and who's helping me to develop and grow. But for where she is right now, she's happy enough with that. So I think it's all down to our perception as well. Oftentimes, I suppose I'm the kind of person that if something is not quite right, I'm going to get out of that situation. Whereas there's a lot of people who, for one reason or another, they're staying. And the other thing I was going to say on that is that if you reframe that, rather than like I'm feeling stuck here, or I have to do this, or I have to go to work, if you reframe the language that you use around that to say, I'm choosing to stay here because of X, Y, Z. So in the case of my friend that I mentioned, she's choosing to stay there because she can work quite flexibly. She can work from wherever, and that actually really suits her lifestyle at the moment. And likewise, you know, I'm choosing to stay in this situation because I'm saving money for my family, because I'm supporting my family. I'm choosing to stay. If you just flip those so that it's a choice, because it is a choice that you're making. If you're not changing the situation that you're in, then it is a choice that you're actively making.
I think that's huge, Aoife. That piece
Around choice is huge. It came up for me years ago when I was researching around workplace bullying, and I contacted a professor in the States looking for a paper. And as part of the conversation, he said to me, you know, even in relation to bystanding, for example, choosing to say nothing can be a rational, self-protective, important choice.
Okay,
you know, so we have to be less judgmental about the choices and understand the choices. But when we know we have a choice, our risk to burnout is less than if we feel we have no power or no choice. Well, that's the way my thinking is going. I'm not saying I'm right on that one, but that's the way I think.
It sounds like, I mean, I thought that was coming from research, Patricia. So, you know, I would imagine that is the case, that if we feel a greater sense of control and, you know, after I did the master's, I put together this framework for happiness at work. And one of the pillars is about our needs at work, or our motivations. And one of those motivations is autonomy. But it's not just about having a whole load of autonomy. Autonomy really is a sense of choice and control over what you do and how you do it. But with that, you need the freedom, but you also need the direction and guidance that, you know, that comes with, here's exactly what the expectation is in this role, or here's what our expectations of you are. And that enables you then to give much more valuable feedback. So when someone is not performing, but you haven't provided really clear expectations as to what they should be doing, then it's kind of hard to come back from that. They're like, but I didn't actually know what the expectation was. And I think a lot of leaders fall down in this area. Like, they might not be clear about the expectations that have been put on them. They're passing things down to someone else, but they're not really explaining what the expectation is. And I think a lot of that leads to overwork and stress. And, you know, you're kind of floundering about because you're like, I think this is what I'm supposed to be doing, but, you know, I'm not really sure. This is what my boss said to do. And, you know, there's loads of things that contribute. I think we went slightly on a tangent there, but just trying to build on that point around this idea that, you know, it's having that sense of choice and control is one of our fundamental needs at work.
But I think that's really important because there's something else in it too that I'm noticing. It can be hard for us as leaders. I don't know if it's an Irish thing, but when we say these are my expectations, we're almost a little fearful of being authoritative in outlining what our expectations are. So we've got to build that muscle even as leaders to just make sure that we create that space for clarity, that we say these are the expectations and we can agree them, but that it's clear. And I don't know, are we a bit nervous or a bit reluctant or a bit that we might offend the other person if we state really clearly what the expectations are, but we're hurting ourselves in the long run if we don't.
Yeah, it could be. And maybe to some people it feels like micromanaging. It's like, you know, you're setting, like, here's the overall goal. But the thing with autonomy is that different people have different levels of the need for autonomy. Like, I've managed people where you just tell them something and they know what to do and how to get on with it. But then there's other people who want a little bit more hand-holding, who want a little bit more step by step, no matter the level of seniority. I think different people just have that different need. But then as we progress in our careers, the need for autonomy increases. So we want to have that much better sense of choice and control. If you imagine, you know, you're not going to give the same level of autonomy to someone who's very early career as you would to someone who is senior career. So it's, you know, it's kind of, the need for that autonomy increases over time, and probably because of the experience that people have, that they just know what it is that's expected and know how to go about and get things done.
You're saying a piece there, if I think about how things change over your career trajectory, which has me thinking as well, even in relation to that piece around choice, like linking all of that back in, because it's like, you know, your work is going to look differently at your different career stages, I suppose. And then also that, like, your personal preferences or your desires or what is important to you in work and what do you need to get from work at a particular moment is going to look very different, as, you know, whether it's age related or whether it's career stage related, life stage, you know, whatever it is, it's going to look differently at different points. And I think that's actually really liberating, that piece around, like, I'm choosing this because it suits my needs now. You know, it mightn't next year or in 5 years time or whatever it is. But even having that kind of acknowledgement and awareness of that at this moment in time, it's serving this need. And that's enough for me right now because that's what I'm prioritizing.
That's exactly it. And I think building on that point, someone mentioned to me one time that we have different seasons. Like, I'm a totally ambitious person. I want to just go for it. I don't have kids. But someone mentioned to me on the podcast that there are different seasons. So sometimes you just want to, no, you're not sitting back and doing nothing, but you're not in that ambitious stage where you're working all the hours and you're trying to go for that next promotion. You're just trying to enjoy the role that you're in and have a bit more of a balanced lifestyle. Maybe it's when you have kids, maybe you've just moved house, you know, maybe you have something else going on, your caring responsibilities, whatever it might be. But there are stages where we're not necessarily totally and utterly driven. And I suppose it shocked me because I'm like, I'm always driven. Like, I am just like, I want that next thing. I'm always kind of looking at what's next. So it kind of surprised me when they said that. And I was like, okay, it's worth reflecting on that there are those different stages where it's not all drive. And that need to get the next thing, that need for achievement. It can be a time where you're like, okay, I'm choosing this. I'm choosing not to go for that next promotion because I'm enjoying the role that I'm in now and I want to have that greater sense of balance.
Different seasons. I absolutely love that. That's powerful. Yeah. I could see you with the pen out.
I was fighting with the pen, yeah, sorry, but I absolutely agree with that. And I'm because sometimes I think we might think that we need to go for every promotion that comes when it comes, almost if we're driven in that way. But actually deciding and having some control about it, and deciding the seasons I'm in, depending on my life and my home and all the other things, gives us more control. I really love that idea.
Even taking your example, Aoife, of saying that, you know, you're always motivated, it might even be like an explanation for differences in that motivation, even if we find we're engaging in the same way. Because I think that can change for people too. Like, what you might be really ambitious, but like, what is it that's creating that ambition? I suppose,
where is that drive actually coming from?
Yeah, and that can develop too, I think, even if it is working in a similar way.
That's also important for
leaders to understand, because if I'm very like you, I'm very driven, and I'm like, and get it done, and then I'll have the next vision and the next vision, like, God, we just keep going. And interestingly, I've surrounded myself with people that are a little more cautious than I am in some ways, which is a good balance, which I didn't know I did. It happened sort of by accident, or maybe by subconscious design, but even recognizing that as a leader in the people around you, you know, is a good thing. Just being able to step back and think about it from that perspective. I got a lot from that.
Definitely.
Really useful.
Well, because that's kind of a problem. I'm going to go on a bit of a one now, but that's kind of a problem too, isn't it? Because like, it's almost like it can be perceived, I suppose, if you make that decision, or I'm making a choice now based on the season that I'm in, or, you know, that I don't want to go for this next promotion or for whatever it is that you have coming up, that equates to not being ambitious. But like, that's not necessarily the case either. Like, it is just a journey that we're navigating, because it's exactly as you say again, if it's not like you're sitting back doing nothing, like, it's just kind of taking that ownership and choice depending on what you have going on and what you want is important to you at that time.
This is it, Neve. But I think the unfortunate thing is the perception from the outside. Like, the next time a promotion comes up, maybe you're not even considered because people don't think you want to go for it. And this was another thing, again, a conversation that I had on an upcoming podcast episode, where other people made an assumption because of someone's life circumstances that they wouldn't want to take on additional responsibilities. And I think we need to avoid that. You need to just have conversations with people about this. Like, it doesn't have to be public, but one-to-one with your manager, talking about what's going on and why you're not going for something, or why you are going for something, and what your level of ambition is. Like, this is something that has come up a lot in the last year in particular, where companies are coming to me saying, we want to empower our managers to have these career-based conversations with our staff, because a lot of managers are afraid, or they don't know what to say, or they're afraid of messing it up, or they just don't find the time to talk about careers. You're talking about performance all the time. You're talking about objectives and the KPIs, but you're not necessarily talking about someone's career and what they are doing on a day-to-day basis, and how that impacts on their kind of the longer term of whether it's within the company. And, you know, obviously as a manager, we're hoping that people are going to stay within the company, but what that actually looks like for them in the grand scheme of their career.
I think this is huge. I'm having a
moment listening to you, Aoife, I must say, because I came through my career at a time when it really wasn't okay well, I think maybe as a woman, it wasn't okay to say that you were ambitious about something, and I had to navigate that space. It has changed so much, which I'm so delighted about. But
is it a female thing then, Patricia, where it's okay for a man to say he's ambitious, or it's okay for us to look at men and say, wow, he's an ambitious go-getter, but when it comes to women, it's the perception is very different? Is that kind of what you're touching on?
I think it might have been like that. I think it might have been like that. It wouldn't have felt safe initially when I was in the university years ago. It wouldn't have felt like it was the right thing to do, to say, I want to be a full professor. You know, you know, you worked really hard towards it, but you might not necessarily have announced it to the world that was what you might have wanted.
Yeah.
Whereas now, I think it is more okay for women to say that now, and it should be more and more. We should be absolutely able to say it. It was almost like I can't explain it, but the sacrifice that it would require, might have been greater than what somebody with a family might have been able to do, might have been the perception at the time. I hope I could be rambling now because I haven't really talked about it.
You're making total sense. And I think that's still a problem today in a lot of cases. I saw something on LinkedIn just the other day where they were saying that a lot of women look at that next level up, or they look at that board level, and they see what people have to do, the hours that they have to work, the travel that they have to do, and they think, you know what, that's not for me. And I think it's all I could think from when I read that post was, this sounds like a world designed by men for men, which a lot of time work is. And I think it's about changing some of what's happening there, like the requirements that you have to do or the longer hours. There was, a little while ago, I was like, what if instead of, as you progress your career, you don't necessarily earn more money, but you do have higher levels of productivity or higher impact in less time. And so you get paid the same amount, but you can reduce your hours gradually over time, which kind of takes away this whole capitalist idea of, I want the bigger house and I want the upgrade and I want the promotion for the money and all this kind of thing. And it opens up a bit more opportunity for more people to enter the workforce for a greater variety of the kinds of things that we think about. And we're kind of seeing that to a degree with the future of work in terms of the 4-day work weeks and 5-hour work days and things like that, and a huge focus on the impact and the outcomes that are created from the work that you do, rather than the input, which is the time and the energy that you give to work. So, it's not thinking about, oh, well, I did 2 hours extra on Wednesday, therefore it's okay, I can knock off 2 hours early on a Friday. Like, it's not about that. It's about, what am I setting out to do, and how, am I on track to meet that by the end of the month? And if that's the case, and I'm kind of tired, or I have other plans, or I need to be somewhere, then it's okay for me to knock off early today and not be thinking, oh, well, I didn't do my 37.5 hours, or I didn't do my 40 hours this week. It's focusing much more on the outcomes and the impact that you're trying to create from the work that you do.
Love that.
It's a bit blue skies, but I absolutely love it.
It is blue sky,
yeah,
but hey,
I love it.
I'm putting it out there. It's my first time, I think, to say it out loud.
Well, I think we need to say more about this and talk more about this maybe again. But you're right. I mean, it is about, we know the work we need to do. We know the work we need to deliver. I think COVID has changed the how that we do that in some ways. Yeah. There is a tendency to feel like we need to go back to monitoring somebody at their desk at a certain time.
I know.
I spoke about this before, but somebody I knew during COVID had to log on with their Teams camera on to show that they were at their desk every day. It was like, this is complete madness. But, this was how their work was. Yeah. And there's a lack of trust in that. And what you're talking about is high trust, good professionalism, good autonomy, good agency, deep respect. They're the type of things you're describing in your vision.
Exactly. And the thing, Patricia, is if you are asking people to log on and make sure that their camera's on, that's showing a lack of trust on the part of the manager, the leader, the senior leadership, whoever decides that this is the case. But if someone doesn't trust you, do you trust them? It's about mutuality here. So it's not just a case of, we want to create trust by making sure that people are in front of their cameras. It's like, no, it actually doesn't matter what time you log on at work. We can see the results that you're producing. And we know that if you, in some ways, I kind of think if someone is working half the number of the hours, but they're still producing the same results, why does it matter that they're working half the hours? And could you pay them? And here's a novel concept. Could you pay them double to work double the number of hours and have double the amount of impact? And could they have double the amount of impact? Or are they kind of giving all their energy to produce in that shorter amount of time? I think it's, it is a little bit out there, these kinds of topics, but it's the way things are going, and definitely, if there's one way to erode trust, it's saying, we want you to log on at this time, and we're actually going to monitor to make sure that you are logging on at this time. And I saw so many things during COVID, especially of all of this monitoring type of software, and most of it was negative and kind of saying, oh, they can monitor your keystrokes, they can know whether you're actually typing on stuff. Like, not all of our work has to be done on a computer. You could have a pen and paper beside you and you're doing thinking. This is a huge thing for people, that we don't have enough time to really think at work. And when we're thinking, it feels like we're not working. And God forbid, if we're in the office and we're doing some thinking, people think that you're not actually doing any work. But if you think about when all of your creativity comes, it comes when you're not actually working. You know, that's when it all sort of comes out. But there were some positive ones, and that was more focused on making sure that people weren't spending too much time at work and the importance of taking breaks. And so it's not all negative, but like, if people perceive that you just want them to, you know, if you're paying people, I suppose it's the difference between paying people for their hands and their physicality of actually being somewhere and typing things, versus paying people for their loyalty, their heart, and their thinking in their brain, you know? So it's really shifting that thing. And it is kind of hard sometimes, especially if you feel like I'm paying someone to do a job and they're not there when I need them to be there. It's, again, this goes back to the idea of expectations and setting really clear expectations about when you want someone to be available and what kind of work they want to do, and if they're, or what kind of work you want them to do. But if they, you know, if they're getting that work done and if they're producing the outcomes that you both have agreed that are part of their objectives, if they're producing those outcomes and they're doing that in less time, then I don't see the big problem with it.
I love the way you're thinking is quite, it's like the future in the present together. It's trying to keep us moving rather than going back saying this is the way we've always done it. Yeah. It's a sort of a thinking of how we want to be for the future. That's the way we need to think as in leadership and at work. We need to, we're outgrowing, and AI is doing this also for us. Like, we're outgrowing the way we've always done it. We need to think outside the box. So I really like the way that you're visioning.
But something that always struck me as well is, like, who wants to be in a toxic environment? I don't think anyone would say, yeah, I want to work in a toxic environment. And yet toxic environments exist. And I think they exist because they kind of create this us and them. And if you're part of the us, then you feel like you're with the in crowd and you feel like, oh yeah, that's great. But then you're creating that toxic environment for the other people because they're part of the out group, so to speak. So again, this ties in with that idea of, like, this is the future of work. And if people don't want to work in a toxic environment and they're afraid to leave because they're earning money or it's a short commute or whatever it might be, then, you know, how can we create these environments where there's a lot more trust and where people feel like they can actually do their best work? Because when there isn't that trust, then I'm just showing up and I'm doing the job. I'm not going to go above and beyond for a leader who doesn't actually trust me.
And I think the impact of the toxic environment,
as we know, isn't just work. It really affects you on so many different levels. We've just published a paper with colleagues that I work with in 2 other universities, and we called it, the title was that my core is crack. That was a phrase that a participant used about being in that toxic environment. And I was like, that's the best way of describing it I've ever heard someone say. Yeah. It goes in so deep. So it does. So it's painful to choose to stay and it's painful to choose to go. There aren't any easy answers in this one.
Yeah. It is. It's tough. It is tough. And I've been in that environment, and it shows. It impacts on every aspect. It impacts on your confidence. It impacts on your experience outside of work as well, on your relationships, on your health. It has a long-lasting impact. Yeah.
Can we chat a little bit?
It's linked to this about imposter syndrome because it's kind of linked to this. And I
was just going to say the same.
I love your work on this. Yeah. So, because it does add to it. It does make us feel a little more unsafe. So I'd love to chat a bit about it. Can you tell us why imposter syndrome was important to you?
It's kind of almost a happy accident because. And this is what someone with imposter syndrome says, by the way. I just got lucky. I was in the right place at the right time. But no, I was part of a networking group, and a journalist, asked for people to share their experiences of imposter syndrome. And I was like, imposter syndrome? I've had that. So I'm going to share my experiences. And there were 3 in particular that really stood out to me. So I shared my experience of imposter syndrome. It was my first time to contribute to any sort of journalism article, and I wasn't really sure what to do. And I was like, should I follow up? I hadn't heard anything. It was 2 or 3 months later. And I think since learned how things like this work, that they submit it to the newspaper and the newspaper prints it whenever they want, and they usually find out on the day that it comes out. Right. So it came out, and I had my picture, and there was me and there was 3 other ladies. And talk about feeling like an imposter. I was like, there I am in the Irish Times of all places talking about imposter syndrome. And I just started speaking about it more and more, and people were asking me more and more about it. And I became much more interested. I became much more astute at recognizing imposter syndrome, both from my past, but also my lived experience as an entrepreneur and when you are ambitious and you're going to that next level. And I did my own research on it, and I created my program around it. And then I created my ebook as well about it. And I just saw it happening more and more. And these people who are so capable, and from the outside, they look like they have the greatest amount of confidence, but actually internally what's going on for them is, I'm not good enough. I feel like a fraud. If someone's going to find me out any day now, someone's going to come knocking on the door and say, remember that promotion we gave you? Actually, that was a total mistake. We were supposed to give that to Sarah. I can't believe, this is a clerical error or whatever it might be. But the fear is real, and the stress that it causes is real. And I suppose the more I talk about it, the more people say, we need to talk about this more. It's not being talked about enough. And I think because I speak about it so much, I feel like it's being talked about enough. But every kind of new audience or new opportunity that I speak with people about this, they're like, oh, we need to really get this out in the open. And I think one of the ways that we can address imposter syndrome is by actually talking about it.
I found your ebook really insightful for myself, and I did the exercises before we've met as well. And then, I was learning a bit about I was like, and I was doing some of it. So I'm really grateful for that. And I mean, you start by saying it's only a problem if you let it hold you back, but that it can hold us back in really sneaky ways. I love that you use that phrase. And you say in things like self-sabotage and resistance and all of those things that we play out. And that spoke to me. I was like, that makes perfect sense. And I think you're right about that.
Yeah, because I think sometimes we don't know that it's imposter syndrome, or we might think there is this thing called imposter syndrome, but I really am an imposter. But then some of this sneaky, subconscious, self-sabotage type of things that we do, we convince ourselves, like there was something going on with me where I was like, I should have replied to someone, and I completely and utterly forgot. And I'm like, on a subconscious level, that's my imposter syndrome showing up. And I missed out on what could have been a really great opportunity because I totally forgot to reply to someone, or talking to my friend and saying I was going to apply for this award that's coming up, but actually I think I'm not going to apply because I probably won't win anyway. It's like we're self-selecting ourselves out of the running when we say no to ourselves. And she kind of challenged me on that and said, why wouldn't you even go for the award? Like, you need to actually put yourself out there. Is this Aoife speaking, or is this the imposter speaking, and kind of ruling what's going on?
And you also say that
both men and women are affected by it, which I completely agree with now that I've been in a leadership role, and I've listened to colleagues who hold themselves back around different things, both men and women, for different reasons, but both men and women have held themselves back with almost like really good rationales if you were to go into that space. But it is still a holding back of the self, I think.
Yeah, totally. And the reason that it's associated more with women, I think there's probably a few things going on, but the original research was done about women because it was in that academic setting, really high performing women, and they wanted to understand, well, why do these women play down their capabilities, or why do they think all of these things? Like, why are these things going on in their head? And so that was why the research was done originally. But I think now it's evolved to be seen as something that women experience more, and maybe women speak about it a little bit more as well. There's not a lot of men who speak about it, what I found when I first started talking about it and posting about it, especially on LinkedIn, I had so many DMs from men saying, oh my God, that's a thing. I've had that for years. I thought it was just me. I thought like there was something wrong with me. You believe when you tell yourself like I'm not good enough and I someone's going to find me out one of these days. But so many men commented and sent me private messages saying, I actually cannot believe that this is a thing and there's a name for it. And I think oftentimes just naming it as imposter syndrome helps us to feel like we're not totally alone in those feelings.
Yeah. And the tricky thing is that it can manifest itself in so many different ways, and that it can be so covert, I suppose. And like that's kind of that sneaky piece, you know, that you're referring to there. And I think the self-talk that we can do to justify why we're making a decision to cover up for imposter syndrome can be a difficult thing to like really separate out and see like what is actually motivating the, you know, because you can go into I didn't want it anyway, or like, you know, or, you know, that sort of like, you know, you can very quickly do that. And then it's like sometimes, I suppose, even for myself, I find I can obviously identify something that is imposter syndrome, and at other times I could be like really sure it's not, you know, and I just am deciding it for another reason. But like on reflection, when I really tease something out, there's definitely pieces of that sneak in. So I think that's something that's a real challenge with it, is that it can be really covert as well.
Yeah, and I think there's so many fears associated with it. But if we can kind of just unpick this one thing, and again, this is something that I heard recently that really resonated, and it was that if you fail on your own and you didn't tell someone that you went for something, then it's kind of a private failure. But if you do it in a public forum, then you care more what other people think than you do about the actual failure itself. You know, so I think it's the I'm trying to think of the word for it, like the kind of almost the social aspect of imposter syndrome, isn't it? It's the in front of other people, and the whole fundamental part of imposter syndrome, rather than just self-doubt, is I'm going to be found out. Like you are going to be found out by other people. And it's the other people element and the failing in front of other people, I think, is the thing that trips us up a lot. And if we could just move beyond that, I know it's hard, like I really care a lot what other people think, but if we can just move beyond that to, not that it doesn't matter what people think at all, because other people are responsible for making decisions in relation to your career, your promotion, like, so you need to care from that perspective, but don't let that fear hold you back from going for something that you really, really want to go for.
I think this is huge, Aoife, for schools.
Okay, so because in the middle management space, we call them assistant principal 1 and assistant principal 2 roles, and we're seeing a reduction in people applying for them in the first instance, but we're also seeing deep hurt when people don't get them. But I think it's linked to that public social attachment to applying in the first place,
people
being seen not to get it, and then tapping into your own sense of, well, I failed at this and it's been really public, which and I talk about this saying when I left school and went to the university setting, I had to grow up about applying for jobs and not getting them. And it happened plenty of times. And I joke about saying doing the walk of shame, you know, it's not really a walk of shame, but it was my way of joking about it and making it light. But I built the muscle and I got used to it. And it became less personal after a while. And you win some, you lose some. But it was something I had to learn. But I can still see in schools with this AP1 and AP2, somebody had said to me, when you publicly attach to putting yourself forward for something, it's really difficult. And I think as leaders, this is why it's so important what you've just said. As leaders, we need to be sensitive to that and to understand that piece, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Like there are the internal factors, the internal triggers when it comes to imposter syndrome, but then there's the environmental as well. And as a manager, there are some very specific things that you can do. You don't have to say I had imposter syndrome, but I think it's a really nice touch if genuinely you had experienced imposter syndrome in the past when you were doing that same role or whatever it might be, but talking about your own experiences of imposter syndrome, giving feedback, positive feedback. Like this is something when I was managing people I forgot to do all the time, but giving positive, reinforcing feedback, telling people they're doing a good job, because I think oftentimes we worry that we're not doing a good enough job. And as a manager, you assume that people know when they're doing a good job, but they don't a lot of the time. You need to give that the positive reinforcement to say, here's the expectations I have, here's what you're doing, and very specifically, here's your unique capabilities that I can recognize in you. So they feel seen, they feel heard, they feel understood.
It ties back even nearly to the start of the conversation, doesn't it? In that self-employed space where you don't have those interactions, and it's similar position, I suppose, isn't it? If you are in a school or an organisation or whatever it is, and you're not getting that feedback, you're kind of second guessing in one way, even though there can be the assumption, that you just feel that you're doing a good job, or you're doing a good job.
Yeah, no, that's totally right, Niamh. Like if I think about when I was first self-employed, which is probably why I was so okay with talking about imposter syndrome, because I was like, people need to know about this. But the examples that I thought of were not just in when I was in self-employment, which was a huge contributing factor. I'm newly qualified coach. I was still doing my master's. I'm looking around going, here's all of these amazing these businesswomen around me who were like, it just from the outside, it just looks like they have all the answers. They've been doing this for years. And you sort of forget when you're new to anything, it's going to feel like that. And not having that positive reinforcement from a manager to kind of reassure me like, oh yeah, you're doing okay. But the examples then from my working life, and then it was only recently I realized that, like, straight out of university, I applied for a role. And it was something to do with tax. It sounded quite interesting for someone like kind of a numbers nerd like me. And there was several different processes for the whole interview stage. And I withdrew my application at some point. And it was only recently that I remembered that. And I think it was just, again, this fear of what if I don't get it? What if I'm not good enough? Or what if I do get it and I don't live up to expectations? And like that was very early in my career. And the thought never even occurred to me until very recently that probably was imposter syndrome getting in my way. Like, why would you withdraw having not even done an interview? Maybe I had done one interview, but I had to go for a second one or something. But there was something there definitely that it was a job I was interested in. Why did I withdraw?
And I think that's really big. Sometimes people will come for career advice, and I'll say, and they'll be making the decision before they've done the interview, or even put in the application. I'm going, get it first and then make the decision. Go for it first and then have the power to decide.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So if it isn't for you then and you've got it, you can say, look, on reflection, I'm very grateful for the offer, but it's not the right time. Or but it's almost giving yourself the chance to be in the place where you can make a decision.
Exactly.
The imposter stops you getting there.
Instead of saying no, you're basically telling yourself no. You're not allowing them to tell you no. You're telling yourself no to save yourself the despair, the public judgment, whatever it might be, of someone else actually saying no.
Yeah. I was listening to somebody, and they were saying about how the that sense of dying inside, almost you feel like you're almost, when you're rejected, you get a little bit of a sense of dying inside, and that the id is always trying to protect us from that. So that's our imposter syndrome talking to us, minding us, saying, don't put yourself in that space so that you won't feel that fear, but that sense of.
It is, and it's such a valuable point, Patricia, as well. This idea that the imposter syndrome is not there to trip you up. It's not there to make things bad for you. It's there to protect you. It's there to I recognize this situation. We had this before. I don't want you to get into that situation again. So I'm going to put something in the way that makes sure that same thing doesn't happen again, because you see these patterns emerging, and then suddenly you're like, oh, well, I'm too busy, or I missed that appointment, or whatever it might be. There's something there getting in the way. But I think if you can start recognizing these patterns and seeing things that are happening, but also reflect on what is it that you really want, and why is it that you want it? I posted something on LinkedIn the other day about when I did work at corporate and being really ambitious. I had my eye on wow, wouldn't I love to be CEO one day? But then it was like, but why? Why did I want that? And digging into that a bit deeper, it's like I wanted that for the recognition and the status, as opposed to I love what the CEO gets to do on a day-to-day basis, like the actual day-to-day role. It was more about the prestige associated with the role rather than the actual role itself.
Yeah, or there mightn't even be a reason like why you're going for something in a different circumstance. You know, it could just be like if you are that ambitious person, it can just be that's the next thing. So that's the logical thing for me to do next is to get that role without actually having thought about the reasons behind why you would actually want to do that or if you want to do that.
And I think that, again, that is such a valuable point, Niamh. And I was like that as well. I was like, what's the next step here in my career ladder that I've built for myself? Without really thinking beyond the organization that I'm in at the moment, without thinking that I could do something completely different. I could go to a different industry. I could go to a different organization. I could do a different role in the same organization. I could make a lateral move, which I think when I was at work, I was really kind of like, oh, why would you make a lateral move? Like, why wouldn't you move and get a promotion? So I think that's becoming more common now, and a really great way to progress your career because you have a broad range of experience across different departments. I think it's really, really important to do that. But yeah, I think we sort of get in our own way sometimes by narrowing our vision just to what is that next step rather than thinking about the bigger picture. I did this so much in my career. And I had a conversation with someone, this is going maybe 15 years ago, probably more actually. And I was really keen to move to the next level. And he was like, you have to wait 6 months. And I was like, 6 months? That seemed like a lifetime at that stage. I really wanted it quickly. But you need to, I think, consider, well, what is the longer term of where it is that you're trying to get to? And even if you take a salary cut, even if you have to change jobs, like there's all of these different considerations, but where is the end goal? Where is it that you want to end up rather than just progress, get a higher salary, get a higher salary, get a higher salary. And then you get to the top of the ladder or the perceived top of the ladder and you're kind of looking around going, is this all there is? Is this what's here? Is it, you know, it's about enjoying the journey that you're on, like enjoying the stuff that you're doing as you go along. And I think if you're enjoying what you're doing and you can make moves to do more of what it is that you enjoy, then you can move back to what I was going to say is when you get to the top of that ladder, then presumably you're going to enjoy. And it's not just, I'm doing this work for the sake of the destination and where I'm going to get to and the status I'm going to have and the prestige and the money probably as well. But it's more about, okay, I'm doing something that I really enjoy and I'm going to just do more of the stuff that I enjoy so that I'm enjoying now and I will continue to enjoy into the future as well.
I was also really struck, Aoife,
by when you were talking about, you have in your book, which I really recommend to read, and the exercises are definitely worth doing, and we'll put the note to the website, but you talk about the ABC methodology, but you talk about giving your imposter a name, right?
Yes.
And talk to them. And I quite love that idea because you're externalizing them, but you're also maybe calming some of that anxiety that's inside. So if you're going to say, okay, Seamus, sorry to all the Seamuses out there, but okay, Seamus, you know, I hear you, and, you know, I need some time to think about that, but, you know, I'm going to ask you to just pipe down for a little bit so I can figure out what I want to do.
Exactly.
I just loved that. I thought it was a great idea.
Yeah. And I think for me, it's naming it as imposter syndrome, but then giving it a name. So mine is called Sandra. And so you can say, thank you, Sandra. I know that you're really concerned for me. I really appreciate you. And going back to what you said, if you could just, you want to appease them as opposed to saying, now you can shut up, because, you know, if you try and block something out or shut something up, it's just going to get louder and louder. So if you say, thank you, I appreciate you sharing that with me, sharing that you think that people will think that I'm not good enough or that people will find me out or whatever it might be. I appreciate you. Thank you. Now I'll take that into consideration, but it's really taking action, feeling that fear, but doing it anyway. So taking action despite how you feel, you know, and I think safe in the knowledge that when other people are doing stuff and they look really calm on the outside, they're probably not. you know,
Absolutely.
that they are feeling exactly these same things, but we can't see that from the outside.
Yeah, that swan is definitely flapping
underneath to move forward. But when I was doing the exercise, I said, what would I say to myself? And it's interesting what you're saying, because I wrote down, thank you for trying to mind me. And you're right, there is a potential here, but I think I have got this. Was the kind of phrase that I wrote down.
Yeah.
So I was really doing it, but I was like, yeah, I think that's really helpful to, and it was that piece of that I was saying, actually, this imposter syndrome is about minding ourselves.
Yeah.
So it's not our enemy, really. That's the, and to think differently about it, which I thought was really useful.
I think that piece around the name as well just really heightens like the familiarity, or increases the familiarity with something, which can be really helpful in something that can be difficult to identify.
It's the familiarity, but it's also the separating of the internal dialogue as well.
Yes.
And being able to say, Aoife can speak from a place of empowerment and saying, oh, thank you, but I think I've got this. And then Sandra is actually the one who's saying, who do you think you are, going for that award, posting that on LinkedIn? No one's going to like that. All of this stuff, whatever is coming up, you can attribute it to someone else. Obviously that voice is in your head still, it's not someone else, but the attribution is kind of separated, and you're able to distinguish the different voices then.
I think the research
when you came out really as well, because you talk about gathering evidence that you've got it, like gathering the evidence, you know. And I love this piece around, you know, print out your positive feedback, or you know, collate it. I put down print it and keep it, but collate it. And I've often said, when supporting leaders, keep a wins journal, and you're saying the same thing. So put down the successes, and in those moments where you think, oh my God, am I achieving anything here? That's somewhere on the desk that you can go, oh, but I did that and that. Okay, I'm definitely
to that email folder, or you
whatever
go to
it is.
you know, the folder on your desktop or whatever. And interestingly, at the time of this recording, I did an article on LinkedIn recently about the end of year reviews, because when I worked in corporate, the end of year reviews, the process started in November. We had to fill out all of the, like, oh, this is everything I've done this year, and these are all the goals I've achieved, and all of that kind of thing. And having easy access to wins, or, you know, anything like that, makes it so much easier when it comes to that process at the end of the year, as just an added bonus.
Oh, it's huge. And the other
thing that I did that I didn't realize when I was doing this when I in my work first in the university, but if somebody gave me a thank you card, I always kept it and put it on the shelf.
Yeah.
And every so often, if I was looking for a book off the shelf, the thank you card would almost fall down, and it was by accident. But I think
it's so nice. Yeah,
there's just something in it about saying, oh, I am doing okay, because there were times when you feel like you're not.
Yes.
You know, so these are important. We can brush. We're so easily moved towards brushing good pieces of feedback away and focusing on the negative, and maybe bringing those positive pieces back into balance was part of one of the pieces that you say is important for addressing imposter syndrome. I think you're absolutely spot on. The other thing that I also wanted to say, which was your third step, so the first one was acknowledge, and that's giving the name. The second is believe and keep track of what you're doing well. And the C was courageous action, which I absolutely love. And courage is everyday walking. It's not always these big superhero pieces of work that we do. They're the everyday. And you say really clearly that clarity comes from action and confidence comes from action. And I you know what, I have to write that down and keep that in mind, because it does. And I thought that was powerful.
I think so often we wait till we feel confident before doing something. And again, this could be because we're looking at other people, and from the outside, they look like they have it all figured out. They have everything so clear for them. They feel so confident in what they're doing. But actually, internally, they could be like that swan that you mentioned earlier. Like, it's the feet that are going mad under the surface of the water. And you see this graceful swan at the top. That's all you see. But I think it's knowing that you don't have to feel confident to take that action. And that's why I talk about it being courageous. It's having that courage. And I love how you've said that as well, Patricia, that it's the everyday. It's not courage with a capital C and this huge gigantic goal. It's the everyday things that we do and being a bit brave about the actions that we take on a day-to-day basis. And so having that courage is really, really important. And with that taking action, maybe sometimes you'll have setbacks. I've changed my word around failure now. I talk much more about setbacks. It's a setback on the journey to success, and what can you learn from that, and what might you do differently the next time, and what are the resources that you have at your disposal? Who can you reach out to? What do you already have access to? But then the more action you take, the clearer you get. And again, to tie this into the entrepreneurial journey, like I feel things have got clearer over time, but when I look back, I think, how has it taken me so long to get to this crystallized bit of information? It's because that journey is long, and you just keep going and going and going, and then maybe you'll have an aha moment, or maybe you'll have some sort of a breakthrough, or something will happen really quickly. But it tends to be that long journey, and you take action and you feel more confident because you've taken that action and it's worked out well, or you feel more confident because you've taken action and you've been able to learn from some sort of a setback that you have. Even if you're like, okay, so that didn't work out so well, it gives you that confidence to keep going, knowing that I've learned this and I'm going to do it differently the next time.
I'm
definitely thinking a lot more about courage, and especially in the toxic workspace, I think, because, and I've said to some leaders that I've been working with, courage sometimes is just standing every day. It's just standing up. Not even speaking up, but just standing up. Or courage is going into work every day. Or courage is just chairing that meeting. Or courage is asking to rotate the chairing of that meeting. So we have this idea that the courageous actions are huge outward movements, but sometimes the courageous actions are very much about overcoming whatever it is that is in that space that's holding us back or hurting us. And in toxic workplaces, we're getting hurt by people. So it's the courage can be in saying, I'm going to be that swan in that meeting. And when the stuff is coming at me, when I come out of that meeting and I break down crying and no one else can see it, that's for me. But the courage is that I went in there and I did it. And there's a lot to be proud of when people do that, but it's not something you can shout from the rooftops. So it's everyday walking. To me, that's what courage is.
I love that. Really great analogy.
And it's so often just taking that first small step, isn't it? And I think that ties in, Patricia, what you're saying as well. It doesn't have to be something huge, but when you do something small, you are on your way to do the bigger piece, or the bigger piece that comes with it. Is that
you're going in the right direction? Yeah,
exactly. Like I find it all the time. Even in supervision, in terms of writing, it's kind of like, until everything is perfect, I don't want to start getting it down on paper because it's not good. Where it's just like, you just have to start. It's a dangerous game, isn't it? Like waiting until, like in this case, I know we're talking about, waiting until the confidence, but like waiting until you have the promotion, waiting until you have the finances, waiting until
you're less busy, which is
waiting until you're less busy.
You're never going to be less busy.
Yeah, exactly. It's a dangerous game.
Yeah, I'm writing a book at the moment, actually, and I don't talk about it all that much publicly, but I'm writing a book at the moment, and they talk about I think I'm trying to think of what word they use, but they use a word saying it's the rough draft, basically. Your first one, it's just getting it down onto paper. You don't have to have all the citations, you just get your ideas out there, and then you go back and you edit it yourself, and you make the connections, you see what's missing, then you get other people to look at it. When you feel like it's a bit more like, oh, now it's less of the terrible first draft. And then other people look at it, you take on board their feedback where it's relevant, and then you get an editor to look at it. And then, so it goes through other people, but it's the getting down first and not waiting till you have everything perfect, because you can always polish things afterwards. And even if there is a mistake, and maybe a book is a little bit more serious, but like a social media post, for example, like not waiting till you have everything figured out or everything perfect, right from wherever you are at the moment.
I would have been very tentative about putting myself out in the public domain. I just would have been. I'm a raging introvert, which people don't really know about me, but I am. So being out in public is quite a challenge, even though I do it all the time. But if I allowed, my imposter to talk to me too loudly, it just wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
And you ask, somebody will think this is stupid or this is, but actually, where I've ended up is saying, is it honest? Is it my truth? When it's good enough.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way that we need to live, which is
definitely.
And I've taken that almost from Byron Katie's work, and I keep talking about her a good bit, but it's like, is it true? Is what I'm saying to myself true? How do I know it's true? Well, when I ask that question to the imposter, it fairly crumbles. But who will I be if I don't do the question? Who will I be if I don't give this a go? I'll be the person regretting. And I don't want to do that.
I love that phrase.
I think that's lovely.
That phrase. Who will I be? Because I think we probably go a bit like deep here now, but think about what did you want when you were a kid? Like, what did you want to do? What did you want to become? And we get into the adulting of being an adult and the day-to-day stuff and the responsibilities that we have. And we just kind of stay where we are because it's what we've always done. But actually, if you had the opportunity to think bigger and say, but what did I really want then? And is that the same as what I want now? Is there a dream that I had for my life? And I think oftentimes we don't give ourselves space to really think about what is it that I want right now? What does my life look like? I was listening to a podcast the other day and she talked about, and this is really far into the future, but she was saying in 30 years' time, what do you want your life to be like? Where do you live? And who are you waking up beside? And what are you doing first thing in the morning? And how are you spending your day? If you think about those kinds of questions, and 30 years is a long way off, but it gives you some indication as to where it is that you want to end up. And for me, then it's like, okay, so why am I not doing those things now? If that's where I want to end up, what steps am I taking to get there? Like 30 years maybe for some people is too far, but even thinking 5-10 years, like where do I want to be? Or even, scary thought, but think about 5 years ago, where did you say that you wanted to be? And are you still in the same place now? A lot can change in 5 years, but also a lot can stay the same.
I think we have to do, this is the way
I'm sort of thinking at the moment, we have to do today what we want for the future. So if I want, and I'm trying to do that with a big project at the moment. So I'm saying I need to take an action every day today in order to arrive to that big project that I want at the end. It's a renovation project, but I have to do the pieces today because I'm a bit kind of...
It's the small tasks that build up and, they what's the word? They compound over time. You have to do those things, but they compound over time and they all add up to this huge thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do think it's really important. And I know we have touched on this, but just to even revisit now, like, obviously there's so much that we can do to support ourselves in this space, and so much of it is about the self-talk and the way we're framing things and all of those, and the ability to recognize like all of those sorts of things. But I suppose tying back into the toxic workplace, I suppose there is a piece around like, there is an environmental factor, and I suppose there's a piece of like what we're doing for ourselves, but it's also like the responsibility that we all have for one another to treat each other with that respect and kindness, in the workplace, that will make all of this so much easier. It's not like it's going to get rid of it totally, but I just think it's important that we do kind of bring that back into the picture as well.
Yeah. And it's interesting as well, Niamh, because I work with loads of different organizations, and you can really tell, within a few conversations, within a few email exchanges, what different places are like to work in by how they treat people. Like, I'm not someone who works there, but I'm an external provider. But it's very different. And I think it is a cultural thing. And I get some people want to be a bit more professional than fun. But it's just a really interesting thing to look across that and how you get treated as a person. And if we can just bring more of that human, like, I am a human, so if you don't have time to talk to me, then send me an email and say, listen, I don't have time right now. I'm a human. I will understand. I don't have a lot of time either. I will get it. or if you're just not interested whatsoever, then just let me know as well. It's the kind thing to do, I think. I think sometimes we're so afraid of offending people by telling them something we think they don't want to know, that we just avoid telling them whatsoever, which is the unkindest thing that you can do.
Yeah.
Clear as kind is spreading around.
But I really believe it. Clear as kind. Yeah,
Powerful.
absolutely. Yeah.
Aoife, if I was to give you the awful task of trying to think, what one takeaway message would you love our listeners to hear after listening to this conversation? Well, I know it's difficult to...
Well, what we haven't really touched on, like we've kind of talked about the ABC methodology. I talk now about the D, which is do it anyway. So like that's kind of if you're feeling, just do it anyway. But what we haven't really talked about is the happier at work framework. We kind of touched on the idea of autonomy, which is part of the needs or motivations. But really, for me, the framework, and it can work in both ways. So if you think about as a leader, it's the culture is one pillar. So how are people behaving in the workplace? And does that align with how you say you expect people to behave? Does it align with what you post on the wall, how you do emails? Then there's the motivations part, which is all about needs satisfaction. So understanding what our core needs are at work, and that's at an individual level. So that's, again, really the responsibility of the leader to understand what each individual's needs are. So we have our 3 universal needs of autonomy, relatedness, and competence. Autonomy, we talked about sense of choice and control. Relatedness, how do you relate what you do on a day-to-day basis to the impact that you're having, to the clients that you work with? Also thinking about how you get along with the other people. And then the competence piece is, do I feel capable of doing my job? Am I being sufficiently challenged in the role, or do I feel out of my depth like a total imposter? And then the third pillar is around strengths. So again, understanding and speaking about our strengths. This is not something I ever spoke about when I worked at corporate. We didn't openly speak about what each other's strengths are. We kind of maybe had a vague idea, but not really unless you're working really closely alongside someone. So for me, fundamentally understanding as an individual what are my strengths, but as a leader, knowing who has what strengths and how you can empower people to use their strengths. So they're the 3 pillars, and you can kind of use those whether you're thinking from the perspective of an individual or a leader. And then from a leadership perspective, the additional things to think about are the base of the house, if you like, is psychological safety. Are you creating an environment where people feel that it's okay to speak up, that they can share what's going on, that they can challenge how things are done, that they can challenge the status quo, that they can share their wild ideas, no matter how crazy they are, and they won't be ridiculed or they won't be bullied or made fun of or anything like that. So creating that environment is fundamental. But then the piece on top, then the roof of the house, is the leadership itself. So does the leadership have capabilities to execute across those different pillars to create that positive environment, that psychologically safe environment for people to have? And you need to have the right leaders in place who want to lead and don't just want the name of leader or the money that's associated with it, but people who actually care about developing the people within the organization. So it was kind of more than 3, but hopefully it gave a synopsis, a flavour of the happier at work framework.
I love it. We talk a lot about the importance of culture in our work. That's kind of driven a lot of our work in the past maybe 5 years. And I'm also really trying to look at strengths-based approaches to how we do leadership, but also to how we do that humanistic, relational kind of leadership piece that's really important. Psychological safety has been something that has peppered my work since I started as an academic, and will always. It's just something. But where my thinking is going now is about sometimes we speak about this in terms of that the leader creates the psychological safety, but it's more complex than that. And some leaders themselves will talk about not being in psychologically safe spaces to lead, that the staff that they're leading is complex. So I'm trying to figure out, and I haven't figured out, I'm only throwing it out, but I'm trying to figure out a more circular way of looking at that concept, even for ourselves in education and leadership.
That's such an interesting point, Patricia. And now that you're saying it, I'm like, oh, absolutely. Because most people that I speak to talk about psychological safety comes from the top down. There is one episode of the podcast where they talked about, as an individual, you can create that psychological safety and you can be the one to kind of feed it up the ladder. So I'll share that episode with you if you want to have a listen to it and kind of see what your thoughts are. But I think it's so valuable. And my impression from what you're saying is that the staff, the employees, are creating this psychologically unsafe environment and almost kind of a bullying or toxic environment among themselves, which makes it difficult to lead in that scenario. And, you know, it's, as an impartial judge, it's kind of like, who wants to work in that kind of environment? And why have the staff created this kind of, like, whether it's a divide or whether it's just toxicity, you know, do they feel, are they the kind of, again, the in group versus the out group? So they feel they're clustered together and they're rebelling against any sort of leadership or something like that. Like, you've prompted me now, and I'm going to have to go and do some research on this and see if there's any papers that address these kinds of issues.
Yeah, I think we should talk more
On this one, I think, and it is. I mean, you've sort of diagnosed it without knowing the context, really, of it, really brilliantly, actually. So that's really impressive. But it is that piece, and trying to leverage in and lead in that space. We're seeing a high attrition in leadership, in school leadership, for example, either through retirements or people stepping down from the role or people not applying for the role. And there's something in this piece. It's not the main reason, but there's something in this piece I've from listening to leaders describe, if they're in that space, it can be really disempowering. And yet at the same time, the weight is on them to provide. And I don't know, it's just something we need to look at more deeply, I think.
Yeah, because there's a flip side in terms of the shared ownership and shared responsibility that we all also have then in terms of create, you know, like not even kind of in a negative sort of situation. It's just that we all have that shared responsibility to contribute to the psychological safety and the culture at work and everything else.
That's it. I love how you said that, Niamh, like it's a shared responsibility. And if you don't want to be in a toxic work environment, then you need to contribute positively to the environment that you're in. Because if you're not contributing positively, then you could be creating a toxic environment for someone else.
Yeah, and I don't know if
we've talked about this before in another podcast, but this came up through a piece of work that we did, which was around a lot of the books that you get will be rate your leader, you know, sort of like tell us about your leader. And we flipped the exercise in one of the classes that we were teaching, and we said, how would you describe how you are to be led? And that went down like a lead balloon. So then we were like, okay, we're on to something here. Because they were very happy to talk about the person leading.
And to push the blame somewhere else. Yeah.
But very taking our own sense of how are we in that space when all this dance is happening.
What am I contributing to this situation? Yeah. And I've been at that, you know, when I was in that toxic environment, and I will openly admit it, I created havoc. You know, I was being a little brat because of the situation that I was in, and I take full responsibility for that now. I didn't then, but now I'm looking back and going, I brought some of that on myself, you know.
But we don't know what we don't know. You know what I mean? We react because there's something happening for us, but we don't know what we don't know in terms of the other space. But having a safe space to find out what we don't know, that's hard to achieve, you know. So that's that's a whole other podcast conversation now. It's
exactly.
really
that is the complexity. That's the complexity in it. Like,
okay,
this has just been brilliant. I've loved it.
I've absolutely loved it as well. Like, absolutely, really, really enjoyable. I loved the questions. I loved the direction that we went in. I love the opportunity to share about what the future of work might actually look like. And really, really enjoyable. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, I love listening to your podcast and love following your work. So just and how you are here is how you are there, which I really like. That congruence is really important to me and the people that I meet. So it's been an absolute pleasure, and I really do want to meet you again. I know I said earlier, like love to meet, but I really would love to do that.
Yeah, next time I'm home, I'll have to either meet in Dublin or make a trip down to Limerick. Yeah,
yeah, just give us a shout anyway. Yeah, and we'll figure something out for sure.
Have cars, we'll travel. We're very happy to hop on the road and do an after, you know. So absolutely.
Brilliant.
Thank you, and
it was such a pleasure. Thank you.
Wishing you tremendous success with the work, Aoife. You deserve the richness.
Yeah, absolutely. Such positivity. Incredible.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aoife.
Thank you.
Okay,
Take care.
Bye now.